Today you'll see the best pure bolts only crossbow build for endgame, but on a budget. You don't even have to spend a single divine orb to get all of this going. Yes, you heard that right. How can something like that be even possible, right? Well, today you'll find out. This is the follow-up video to my leveling and entry to endgame crossbow build that you might have seen. A lot of you guys liked my build and had great success yourself with it. So due to large demand, I have now made a step-by-step guide on how to destroy the endgame with this build and also map tier 15s, tier 16s. So forth. However, I would highly recommend you to watch the original video to actually understand the build and all its intricacies, and to just actually follow what I'm saying. But a quick 1-minute recap to refresh your minds is as following, and in this video it's all on tier 15 or 16 maps with a bunch of annoying modifiers and wherever possible corruption irradiated maps, so true endgame, whereas my other video was more focused on leveling and getting into endgame. We use galvanic shards as our clearing tool. Galvanic shards gets online very early on with very minimal investment. It has a great spread and can nuke your entire screen. This is not just due to its great spread, but also due to its synergy with Herald of Thunder, of which both in combination will lead to beautiful clears as they synergize very well together. You want to do them tier 15 plus breaches quickly, no worries and no problemo. Galvanic shards is here for you. For elites, we can also destroy them with galvanic shards or nuke them out of existence with our plasma blast, which is an important tool for bossing and the big boy rares. Plasma blast is nice because we can charge it preemptively even when our target hasn't appeared yet on screen or is still in the yapping phase, to then accordingly get rid of them instantly when they show up. For bossing, our combo is as following. We start with plasma blast, get 3 hits of it in, and this will pretty much always proc shock on our target due to the high scaling of the skill and our gem setup. The shock is important because it allows for us to use shock burst rounds, and shock burst rounds is amazing, which truly comes online on shock targets, and with it you can get a very juicy machine gun type of crossbow going that can annihilate all endgame bosses like it's nothing. We then also have the Ripwire Ballista to generate rage to increase our attack power more, and can also function as a distraction. Emergency reload for essentially free extra damage, and shield charge for most of the tier climbing and Atlas quest completion due to its nice flexible pathing options and movement speed increase. That was the short gist of it, and crossbows may admittedly not be as popular as other playstyles at this moment. And you might ask yourself, why not play one of the builds that 75% of the ladder is playing? Well, reason number one, I already said it, this build gets online with minimal investment. Not a single divine orb was spent. Reason number two, while you are seeing that this build is definitely powerful, it is not broken. We're not utilizing sketchy things. The chance of this build getting nerfed by the upcoming patch is pretty much zero, so it is a great build and playstyle to invest in and get going. You're pretty much safe on your investments, both resource wise but also the time you will invest to gain knowledge and get familiar with this build. You are safe in all departments. If anything, it might actually get buffed because there are various bugs that are actually hindering the true crossbow potential, like bugs with reloading, but also, for example, shock burst rounds, not getting additional bolts when increasing the quality of your gem. None of that matters though, because crossbows feel still really smooth to use. Number 3, it is really fun and clears all types of content extremely well. Number 4, using a crossbow. Do I need to say more? And number 5, you pretty much never die with this build, as we will get absolutely crazy sustain, making it extremely beginner friendly and just a good option for anyone really. More on that in a second. However, before we proceed, I have a question. What would happen if you would drop a vape from 40,000 feet? Well, you might want to find out after trying out Fume. Fume is not a vape, it's an award-winning flavored air device and a leader in this category. So what that means is that it draws flavor to your mouth. It's a great way to satisfy your oral fixation with non-toxic flavors, free from nicotine or vapor, and it's safe to use anywhere. Fume's design is also more than just flavor. It's an awesome fidget tool with magnets and clicks that help calm anxiety. I personally really like how Fume feels. Premium quality, sleek design, and perfect for taking with you on the go. And the flavor that I personally like the most is going to be the crisp mint. It's refreshing and satisfying without any of the harmful effects you would associate with other habits. Fume is great for quitting vaping and has already helped over 300,000 people build better habits. Try Fume today, and if you order the journey pack now using my code as shown on screen, you'll get a free Fume topper, an awesome accessory to level up your experience. Use the shown link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Up until tier 12, 13, 14 maps or so, you can definitely clear everything as a glass cannon. The build will carry you. However, after that, defenses will become more important, and it's a good thing that Witch Hunter gives us source reward. See, Witch Hunter's source reward can become very beefy. You can reach around 4k on a very strict budget, pretty easily I would say. And what source reward does is essentially it just absorbs a good portion of elemental damage that would otherwise hit you, so fire, lightning or cold damage. But where it truly gets interesting is mixing this source reward with our Cloak of Flame, because Cloak of Flame will now in addition convert other potentially threatening type of damage, physical damage that hits you, into fire damage. So what that means is that we can use this cloak to get really good sustain going, because we will of course cap all of our elemental resistances. So basically the Cloak of Flame in combination with your source reward will then tank a lot of incoming damage. The Cloak of Flame in combination with source reward is just the beginning though of our sustain, because we will mix that with a lot of evasion, energy shield and various defensive persistent buffs, of which the cocktail of all these things together will essentially lead to you never dying. So the setup has a lot of sustain going for it in addition to crazy damage output. But how to actually get all of that though in your gear and passive tree? Well, glad you asked. Let's get into that. So for your gear, rerun the Cloak of Flame, and before I hear someone crying in the comment section that this thing is unique so it must be expensive, no, it is not. It is very cheap, 1 exalted orb, and you have this amazing thing that synergizes extremely well with our build. I would highly suggest to corrupt it as well with a Val orb, because you can get really good extra effects on it, and if it fails you can try again. It's only 1 exalted orb. However, the Cloak of Flame naturally converts 40% of physical damage into fire damage, but when you consider the effects of corruption, that number can get even higher, up to around 50%, so you can get better results there as well. However, of course, that is getting into perfect roll territory, so that will naturally be more expensive, but like I said, just try to get a good corruption going. Try it a few times, the gamble is worth it, and if you don't get anything decent, well, the Cloak of Flame will still suffice in its most average form. What you essentially want on your gear, however, at all times is 75% elemental resistances, cap on all 3 of these, an energy shield based helmet, armor based gloves, and energy shield evasion based mixing boots. Why all of these specific things? Well, I will get to that when we get to our tree, and in the meantime, stack evasion rating and energy shield wherever you can on your other gear, like your amulet. Regarding your amulet, get a fat juicy spirit roll going, because we will need at least 154 spirit for this build. It's easy to get, don't worry about that. Outside of that, maximum life, really good too. You want to aim to at least around 1.8 to 2k HP, I would say, which is more than easily achievable, as you see here on my HP bar in a budget build, and either at the very least 30% movement speed on your boots, and if you have budget to spare, 35% movement speed. Then finally, dexterity, intelligence, or all plus modifiers to your attribute rolls are good and decent modifiers to consider too. Now I hear you asking, why did we take this? Why did we take that? Well, it is thanks to this thing. Let's go through my tree, and everything I just said will then start making sense to you, like I've been playing this game for over 9,000 hours. Look, I've tested out all the things there is to test with this build, and the problem with this build is never going to be damage. However, around tier 14, tier 15 maps, you will get one tapped a lot if you don't get proper defenses going. So we have to get that in the tree as well, which is of course not going to be the same as what I recommended during leveling, where you pretty much can ignore defense and just want to get as much offense as possible to quickly go through the campaigns. We started as a mercenary, a witch hunter. However, you can play this build as a gemling legionnaire or going the ranger route as well. There are various classes and ascendancies where you can make this build work with, but instead of the source reward, in those cases you would just grab a chest with the biggest evasion possible and grab acrobatics. That is going to be the easiest alternative if you cannot utilize source reward. Okay, but why did I actually take Witch Hunter? Well, it is due to the source reward, as well as just amazing clear options in the Ascendancy, and also because I just like the idea of the class. Okay, let's stick to our tree here and how we're going to progress through it. We start here in the tree at the Witch Hunter beginning nodes. We initially start with the offensive nodes, as the other nodes include armor increases, and we don't really need any of that. We move then downwards like this, giving us attack speed, damage, movement speed, and more reload speed, with ending up at the instant reload speed notable, which is a really good notable. And we then go south and grab the lightning related nodes, since all of our elemental damage is in fact lightning damage. And in this portion of lightning nodes, we grab lightning rod, which is an absolute must-have for a nice damage increase to the build. However, we now go and path much more defensively after that. We start taking the polymath and jack of trade nodes as well, and all nodes leading up to these two notables. This is important because we need 3 attributes in our setup to get the crossbow skills going. Dexterity requiring persistent buffs, with also the intelligence based requirements of armor for energy shield, and jack of trades gives us extra damage based on that idea as well, so there's a nice synergy there. If you remember, I said to get get the gloves with the biggest juicy armor base that you can find, and it's for this talent right here, which we also grab. Leather bound gauntlets. We take it and route towards it. You can easily get very cheap gloves with say 600-700 armor, which then with this talent will give an equal amount of evasion as well. And that's really nice because these two will both contribute to our sorcery ward's size. So our sorcery ward will now only from our gloves already have 1200 plus armor and evasion combined to start scaling its size. And that's obviously nice because this is just one single item. Now this corner is done and we will need to path towards the monk starting zone to get a lot of good stuff going for our energy, shield and evasion scaling and to finish off our sustain. While we path towards there, however, we will still get some great offensive options like the shock effect, magnitude increasing nodes up to frazzled here, which will make our shock burst rounds on bosses a lot stronger, and these attack damage increasing nodes give a lot of other nice benefits as well, like movement speed and a lot of maim. So a win-win situation there. We path up towards the north then, but grab the elemental damage giving nodes up to the jewel, and more importantly catalysis, which is going to directly synergize with our cloak of flame because it will convert another 5% of physical damage to elemental damage that our sorcery ward then can very easily absorb. As you see, we utilize different type of things to make our sorcery ward and cloak of flame a terrifically dangerous combination for our enemies. Path up, grab escape velocity on the way to get a huge evasion rating bonus as well as more movement speed, and you see me taking quite a bunch of movement speed nodes as well because logically it will help the pace in which we clear these maps tremendously. Then we keep pathing up to the north towards the monk starting zone because here there are a lot of those juicy defensive nodes that we will want. First of all, we path into two ways, the direction to the right to get subterfuge mask, which is really nice because now you know why we took a helmet with a fat juicy number of energy shield. At the other side of the map in the monk starting zone, then we grab all those juicy energy shield and evasion increasing percentage based modifiers, and at the same time grab the great notables here like mindful awareness, and we also path a bit upward towards essence of the storm to make sure we pretty much always apply shock and get more lightning damage too in the process. And then at the other side of the map all the way here, you also want to grab these lightning nodes in my opinion and wild storm and path upwards to this somewhat isolated section, and on the way also grab the herald related nodes right here. The synergy with lightning rod and these lightning damage and herald related skills will actually from my experience lead to a lot of extra damage. There's also this node section by the way, which is definitely worth mentioning. I didn't take it myself because ultimately I was never dying and feeling tanky enough, but you can increase your max cap resistances for your elemental resistances through unnatural resilience and the nodes leading up to it, which can be very nice when considering the combination of sorcery ward and cloak of flame. So just a little shout out to these nodes. For your attributes, you're going to mostly focus on dexterity and intelligence. These two will at all times be your highest attributes, but you also need some strength to meet all requirements for the build, especially when considering crossbow skills which will have strength and dexterity as their baseline requirements. The jewels then, you can get a lot of good stuff on these things, so actually getting the sockets in a tree for them is a lot of power relatively speaking and something to look forward to. Highest priority modifiers on these is going to be extra evasion rating in my opinion, then attack speed, lightning damage and increased magnitude of your shock, which in turn will lead to you dealing more damage on shocked enemies. If you can get those easily in like a combination, then crossbow, reload speed, shock duration and lightning resistant penetration are also decent alternatives from my experience, and you can definitely consider those too. For Ascendancy, initially you want to grab the Zealous Inquisition and the Judge, Jury and Executioner paths for clearing up to say tier 13, tier 14 maps for your Atlas quest, as they provide you a lot of extra power and make clearing very smooth even with bad gear, as they don't require scaling whatsoever due to these skills being tied to RNG and percentage based thresholds, so it's really good for climbing. But then for Endgame tier 15s and onwards mapping, we take the full path of the sorcery ward. This is a 4 out of 4 spending situation. You don't want to just get the sorcery ward, no, you also want to get the final node in this path, as it makes your sorcery ward actually good. Without the final node, sorcery ward is at most meh. And we then also grab the concentration path in the middle. Again, another 4 out of 4 spending situation here. You want want to get the whole path here in one go. And the final node in this path will in fact give us a lot of extra scaling power, which is nice at this point in time because our crossbow will in fact be better, and that 30% extra damage is going to be very nice. The concentration nodes here also reduce the cooldown recovery rates of whatever you're fighting, so in the case of bosses it's actually extra sustain as well, as they can't use their big or special attacks as often. So for your crossbow then, it's going to be your most wanted item really. Most important modifier and stats on your crossbow is going to be physical damage. You want to have a high as humanly possible physical DPS on your crossbow. 450 to 500 physical DPS should be possible on a budget. Get the highest possible physical damage is the TLDR basically. If there's one item you actually want to, you know, spend all your currency on for this build, it is going to be your crossbow or your very first divine orb. You have to just try to RNG it or get it for a nice price. How easy and how cheap you're going to get something good is obviously going to be variable for everyone, but this is an important pointer. However, aside from the physical damage, you want to be on the lookout for elemental damage modifiers. Anything can work in that department, even non-lightning damage modifiers, but lightning damage is probably going to be the best. Attack speed, levels to our projectile skills, leech mechanics, and extra attribute levels are also a great option. Okay, so with all of that then covered, let's summarize our stats. As previously mentioned in the original video, we run Herald of Thunder, Overwhelming Presence, and Wind Dancer, but now also Grim Feast for our persistent buffs, as we can very well utilize Grim Feast with our energy shield. Our stats are then going to look something like this: over 70% evasion rating, which is really nice when considering that Sorcery Ward cuts away a lot of your evasion rating, a nearly 4k Sorcery Ward, nearly 2k energy shield when considering Grim Feast, and over 1.2k health pool, and then armor 2 on top of all of that, in case any physical damage makes it through all that evasion and Sorcery Ward Cloak of Flame goodness. And wherever you can grab some chaos resistance on your gear as well, get it. 30-40% will suffice because it's not as easy to get as the elemental resistances. And yeah, you can see the compounding effect of all persistent buffs and stats synergizing with each other, resulting in us having a lot of sustain and protective layers. We'll pretty much get never one shot with this setup, while of course dealing really good damage of ourselves at the same time. My build here will be up on Mobalytics too, by the way, so don't worry, you can also check all of this out in peace. On that side, I'm also going to put a written version of this whole video on my Patreon in case you want to read everything step by step again in all tranquility. And it's also a nice way to support the channel if you want that. For gems, I would highly recommend to watch my original video to know about all the reasoning for why I took these gems, but let's quickly recap and emphasize any major updates or changes. And I also want to say that I didn't get a perfect jeweler's orb to get 5 gems on any of my skills to keep it as budget friendly as possible, so keep in mind that everything you just saw can even be better with 5 gems when you have more budget to spend. For our Sorcery Ward, we grabbed the 3 Elemental Mastery gems because they're the only thing that actually works with this skill and it's a nice boost. Ripwire Ballista, still Font of Rage and Blood here, and Ancestral Urgency for that quick drop down and quick repositioning, so you can keep building up rage while repositioning the ballista, since with this gem it will drop very quickly, which is a really nice thing to have. For our Shock Burst rounds, it's still pretty much the same: Concentrate Effect, Elemental Focus, because the skill has a high physical damage baseline as only 40% is converted to lightning damage, and Fresh Clip, which can be very much abused with this build to get a lot of extra damage in quick succession. Essentially, you can even start with 0 Shock Burst rounds in fights and then reload instantly and get the Fresh Clip proc before the fight even starts, and then do it again and again since we have quite the attack speed. Yes, it stacks. For our Galvanic Shards, we run Lightning Infusion, Fork, Primal Armament, and Martial Tempo. Nothing really changed there in that department, and I really like this setup for our Galvanic Shards. Makes clearing very smooth. Grim Feast now then as well included in the build. Then Plasma Blast with Scatter Shot, Hourglass, and now new Overcharge and Lasting Shot. I added those last 2 gems to make the subsequent usage of Shock Burst rounds a lot more deadly, and yeah, I can definitely tell you it works. Boss fights are done in seconds because our shock will last longer and it will be a better form of our shock, which will in turn lead to our Shock Burst rounds dealing more damage. Then for Herald of Thunder, still pretty much the same: Innervate, Magnified Effect, and then new both Close Combat and Long Shot. Reason for the inclusion of the last 2 gems being that Herald of Thunder procs all over the field, so this way we cultivate that damage boost at pretty much every location for wherever it procs, which is really nice. Gives us a lot of extra damage all across the board. Wind Dancer then with Main, Blind, and Killing Strike, and if you have a 4th socket here, Pin as well. For Wind Dancer, you want to make make sure to upgrade it as soon as possible and get it to 20%, as when your Wind Dancer is at 20%, you will get a whole extra charge for that, meaning a bunch of extra evasion rating. In my case, 19%. The gems for Wind Dancer are nothing new. Then Emergency Reload stays exactly the same. Premeditation, Ingenuity, and Persistence. And finally, Overwhelming Presence for our final skill slot with Cannibalism for the sustain. The order in how you want to upgrade your abilities is then going to be the following. In my opinion, of course, Galvanic Shards into Shock Burst Rounds, into Plasma Blast, into Wind Dancer, into Herald of Thunder, into Grim Feast, and then the rest in no particular order. If you upgrade your skills in that order, I definitely think you will get the most value and power relative to that number of upgrades. For your Anoint on your amulet, get High Alert. It is cheap and 50% extra evasion rating that will pretty much be applied all the time. Easy. Thank you for watching. Now you know everything to become the absolute strongest crossbow user ever without even spending a single divine orb. Enjoy, subscribe, like, comment, you know how it works, do all that stuff. Goodbye. And don't forget to check out Fume, the award-winning Flavoured Air Device, using my link in the description or the QR code on screen.